I grew up in a world where Spike Lee was so mainstream, it was easier to pretend you've seen his work than it was to watch it. From Lola Darling to Radio Raheem, the young filmmaker had already proven by the early 1990s that his control of the craft is powerful because Spike Lee can present black characters and voices like no one before him. You might believe the great Allah himself designed time just so Lee could tell the story of Malcolm X, because this is a truly epic telling of an incredibly epic man. Malcolm X the film does exactly what Malcolm X the man did, which proves that what's required to be a successful leader of faith is often what's absent in successful followers, and it is the tragic irony of brother minister Malcolm X slaughtering in front of his children by a group of radical puppets that drives home the film and the man's life message. If you are independent of any system, you will be labeled a threat to it. Any great film will make you feel a range of emotions, but I'm not so sure I've ever screened a biopicture that so successfully captured the frustration arrested within a culture and translates it so masterfully. This is a beautifully tragic film that knows what it is and what it's trying to do, while perfectly telling the story in a way that all audiences can absorb and appreciate. I'm incredibly lucky to be joined now by cinematographer Professor Timothy Richardson in the jungle to discuss this masterwork. Brother Professor Richardson, thank you so much for coming in today. I really appreciate it. Welcome.
Thank you for creating this format. Thank you for making space, letting me be here to chat a little bit with you, man.
Do you mind just maybe giving us a little bit of a primer of kind of like what your relationship with the movie is?
I believe I was in 10th grade, and it was a teacher named Miss Jenkins. I'll never forget her. She screened the film, and I remember being so moved, especially it was the scene his double dolly shot where Sam Cooke comes on, and Malcolm, there's we're communicating. He knows that his human experience is about to conclude, and it just moved me how we got to that point and to see this man's metamorphosis. So I then went on to, went to college, and the book always kind of traveled with me over the years as I changed as a man. My perspective on the book changed, which is kind of poetic. And then it became like I read the book, his autobiography 3 times, and then saw the movie again. So, I kind of have at least my own personal understanding close to the subject matter of it, to be able to dive into it and talk all things, plot and film.
First, we're going to talk about plot. This is a long movie. This is a little just a little bit shy of 3.5 hours. But it's not really surprising because this is a life that encompasses so much. I mean, you really do, need that real estate to tell this story. I'm just curious, when it comes to the plot, obviously you said you've read, his autobiography multiple times. How do you feel the film does articulating that story, just specifically from a plot standpoint?
Yeah, transcribing something from literature can always, being filmmakers be such a pressure. In for a moment, this person has come back to life and they're up on this screen. I think Spike Lee has a really intricate, really, interesting perspective on storytelling. So he told it in the Spike way that, in combination with Denzel's performance, that allowed us to escape to a world. And then having read the book, I loved that it seemed to touch on the central themes in his life almost like in a 3 act. I feel like he shoots theater on camera. So, I definitely was able to see, from the man that was no became Detroit Red to to his incarceration to, him joining the Nation of Islam. I thought I did a great job chronologically, touching on points, whether that was, using a tool, a flashback to just give us some context to understand who he is and what he dealt with in his childhood too. And then it would just help the movie progress on. And I mean, yeah, I thought it did a really good job.
It's this interesting choice where the movie doesn't like it doesn't ever really establish a time. In so many periods you'll just see in the lower third or something, oh, 1960, 19, whatever. And it doesn't really do that. In fact, there are moments where you kind of there's a significant jump forward in time and you wouldn't really realize it unless you were paying attention to what the characters are saying because they've referenced something that's happened or you can just tell. But it does just really kind of gracefully move through time, almost as again in the way when we look back at our own lives, you don't really remember specific, oh, this was that day, this was that time. So you do just kind of live the life with him and you kind of navigate, like you said, from point A at the beginning of the movie, which is such an extreme to point B in terms of the character arc and how that's articulated. Well, I'm curious then if I could get a 1 out of 10 for the plot specifically. What does Brother Richardson give just the plot 1 out of 10?
I'm gonna give it a strong. I'm gonna say 10. I'm gonna say 10 because I've read the book as much as I've read the book.
Out of the gate with a 10, I like it. And look, your score that you're going to give this, I think we can all lean on. Okay, this is the score we should be listening to. This one over here, I just watched the movie, so my scores secondary in this.
With a
But that
with a
brings
little
us,
bit of innocent bias, but never hurt nobody.
look, and I have a feeling if you're anything like me, you're probably going to be handing out a lot of tens in this one. But again, I don't want to spoil too much. We're now talking about characters and performances. It's one of the reasons I kind of sped through plot a little bit because there's so many great characters and performances in this movie that I want to talk about. It would be crazy for us to not start with Mr. Denzel Washington as Malcolm X. It's hyperbole to say he was born to play it, but it really does. I mean, you talk about a performance where it's like, oh, no one else could do that.
Mhm.
Margot Robbie is Barbie. Malcolm X is Denzel Washington. Who else could be it?
Yeah, you know what? Denzel took a year off from anything else when he got booked for this role. And I think outside of the presentation of the film as a whole, right, it's a labor of artistic love, but I think we saw a performance photographed that embodied Denzel's like his character work to go travel, for him to go talk with remaining members of Malcolm's family, to telling his agent, I'm taking nothing for a whole year. I'm going to submerge myself in speeches, whatever archival footage he can get his hands on. You see Denzel, then at certain points, he just slips under that magical moment where we get lost a little moment because he's an activist and thank God for history because, we know about Malcolm X, but there's something special that happens in film, right? Where it's art imitating life that allows us to just get lost in it and see what the closest we're going to get to a very subjective, intimate look into this man's life. And Denzel allowed us to experience an array of all the emotions of what Malcolm went through as a man. And I thought it was powerful.
And I don't even mean this as a criticism because Denzel is so charismatic. When we watch, especially a lot of his contemporary roles, you do see a lot of Denzel in it. Even recently, he was, in my opinion, the best, maybe the only good part of a Gladiator 2, but there's still a lot of like Denzel that you see in this. That
Very
is
much.
not the case with Malcolm X. Like he is fully in this character. Again,
Mhm.
there's a lot better impersonators out there than I am who could slip right into a great Denzel Washington because he has this pattern, because he has this sort of this rhythm that he speaks with that's not present in this movie. To see an incredible actor like truly doing character work, which again I want to tread lightly, but that's not how I would describe most of Denzel's career. It's not really
Mhm.
character work. He is a movie star, a leading man in the truest sense of the word. The cool thing about this movie is what it does with cameos. You have Reverend Al
Mhm.
Sharpton, who has a little cameo at one point, who's
Yep.
preaching on the streets. The movie ends with Nelson Mandela teaching, which I'm literally getting goosebumps as I'm saying that now.
Only time being on camera in a film. That was the only time. Like Spike Lee was the only person to ever capture that.
And what's so
That's
amazing about
crazy.
that, and I'm glad that you said that because the point that I want to make is this movie is about community and
Mhm.
it's using the process of making a film something as throwaway as a cameo and it creates something bigger than the film by doing that because you see the sense of community. You see these black leaders coming together to tell a story. And man, that just it really does my heart good because it's so rare in any work that you can just have a moment like that. And cinema allows you with its tools to kind of have just 5 seconds of, oh, hey, there's Al Sharpton. And it leaves you with this feeling of like, oh, this is important. Important
Mhm.
people came
Mhm.
together to tell this story. A really important character in this movie who's played by himself is Martin Luther King. I love the choice that they don't cast an actor to play Dr. King. They
Mhm.
just let him exist in file footage.
Yeah.
A small
Elroy Lindo. Yeah. I mean, come on.
the legend.
Has gone on to be a multi-film collaborator with Spike Lee from The Five Bloods. And I mean, yeah, from Yeah, yeah, man. He's up there. I mean, yeah, and Angela Bassett, I thought was just a bedrock. The essence and the core of a black man is the strong love of a black woman. It really just exemplified black love. So much that he's dealing with personally and then externally in the world, and you just always saw this strong connection between the two, which I just thought was beautiful. And they explored struggle and they explored love. And she knew him from a very boyish standpoint, but also the man they came to know as Malcolm X. It's just beautiful how every character, Spike Lee playing Shorty, incorporating himself in the film was really dope.
I gotta say about Betty or Angela Bassett's character, she has this burden of having to react to Malcolm's death. If you're asking an actor to perform, one of the hardest things you can ask them to do is be hysterical because it seems easy, right? Just go in there and be crazy. But she has to panic, but she has to have a level of control and wisdom. And it's just a moment. But again, what she really embodies in that she's the vessel for all of us, the audience, for so many people before the movie. And it's really difficult to think of a performance, or rather just an ask that a script is going to give to a character and say, or an actress and say, hey, just in a moment, you got to represent the world. I mean, she does it as well as anybody could. She's this sort of emotional bedrock for a character
Mhm.
who really is, I mean, he's purpose driven, but there is almost a lack of humanity as a result of that because he's so
Mhm.
focused on the bigger picture.
Mhm.
So being
Mhm.
able to have this kind of grounded romantic
Yeah.
relationship, I think really does inject so much humanity into him, and she represents that. We would be remiss if we did not talk about Elijah Muhammad, who was played by Al Freeman
Yes.
Jr. Again, talk about big shoes to step into. I can imagine that's a pretty
Man.
intimidating role.
At the time before I got into, I always knew Malcolm was part of the Nation of Islam, but I think being introduced to the film caused me to just explore and research more into it and knowing what Malcolm's relationship was like and his chapters in it and what he accomplished in it and what he accomplished when he exited. And for lack of a better term, just on point. I felt it was at just showcasing this strong bond between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm, but then doing a good job at kind of in a way like in any good film, although we knew the story behind them, I think Spike did a good job at almost making us like in any film where it's like you don't know the plot's unfolding, it's like what is going to transpire after Malcolm separates from the Nation of Islam. There's conspiracy theories and all these different things. And it's crazy. I was feeling that as an audience member at the time and even knowing the story, but I was still lost in the like, where's this going to go now? What's going to happen? He wasn't afraid to, if somebody's perspective was to villainize Elijah Muhammad, or if he did a great job at just being so neutral, just being the man that he was. And I love that because then it just allows people to kind of form their own perspectives and then that creates conversation.
On that note, Tim, then I will get a score 1 out of 10 characters and performances.
I'm gonna say a 10. I personally feel, I know he got it for Training Day. I personally feel Denzel should have won the Oscar in 1992 for this one.
Yeah, I've always kind of believed that like the way you win an Oscar is by like not winning an Oscar. In hindsight, to look back, and recognize how important this performance is. But as much as I love Training Day and I love Denzel in Training Day, I do think this film just asks more of him. So I do agree. I
Yeah,
mean, when you
yeah.
compare the two, this does seem like it's more of an appropriate award winner. But regardless, luckily Denzel's got one little golden guy that he mantled, even though it should probably be two. But we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that in another segment. That moves us on to visual storytelling. I'm really excited to talk to you about this because you yourself are a cinematographer, a purveyor of images, moving images. There's only one shot I want to point out, and then I want to give you the floor because it really stood out to me. It was early on in the first act where Malcolm's mother has been hospitalized or maybe even put into sort of a mental health clinic, but she is just in this completely white room and it's
Yeah.
all white tile and she's in white and it's just this her face and maybe her arms are these little pops of brown skin in this otherwise completely white world that has consumed her. And to me, that's perfect cinematography. To me, that you put that frame on the wall that completely tells the story of what the character is at in this beautiful metaphor. And Spike Lee, in all of his films, uses color so masterfully. But that's why I want to point out this shot because there's no color in it other than the black skin. And I feel like that's the point. And I thought it was so awesome in a movie that really doesn't have to be visually stylized, that it still is, but it's not stylized in a way that's distracting. The floor is yours. What do you think, Tim, of the visual storytelling in this picture?
I had put up Film Grab again. I was looking at it, earlier today, but I'm looking at it again, and wow, you got me looking at that exact still, thinking about how, the mise-en-scene and who Malcolm's mother, is in his life and who she, her husband was. His dad was a follower of Marcus Garvey. So, just to see, what is a strong woman who's, of course, pro-black. She, like her, her children to, almost the metaphor of, what Malcolm's life, in a way felt like he was going through, like what he's dealing with in the world. His mother's, mental declining health. How is he existing in a world as a black man? It's absolutely beautiful. And then touching on, hues, of course, Spike Lee is a painter. Start with School Days, and you can go to Do the Right Thing. He was a great collaborator with Ernest Dickinson.
Ernest Dickinson, the legendary Ernest Dickinson, gone on
Yes,
to be a
yeah.
wonderful director and has had a great run on television and all
Uh,
sorts of different shows.
I would like to say their language exists in the realm of emotional expressionism. Spike's not afraid to switch up the format and, throw in what, 16 millimeter footage just to, for characterization. It was very film noirish at times. You had like hard light blasting through blinds.
Oh yeah.
I think the moments where we specifically started to get like a little lost and say, hey, I could see Malcolm X was when it would switch to the black and white.
Oh
When it
yeah.
was
Oh
to
yeah.
the black and white. And I caught the language of every black and white still was paying homage to an actual still you can find like Malcolm X in. And I think that language really helped us start to just give into the biopic, like, wow, he's recreating photography.
By virtue of recreating those photos, recreating that footage. What you're also doing is you're taking footage that the audience is familiar with before you go into the picture. And so
Right.
it becomes this, again, visual metaphor where when you remove color, all of a sudden Malcolm is having this, what dare I say, black and white conversation as a black man talk to white
Yes,
people. And there's
yes,
and
yes,
there's and it's only when we come
yes.
back out of that footage that we've maybe seen before the movie that we're back in this fully saturated color world that is the life of Malcolm, not just necessarily the Malcolm we knew, so to speak, or the Malcolm that exists outside of the movie.
We talked earlier about the double dolly shot that is just signature, for Spike. I mean, just like what a, way to communicate just the central theme of like, what is this character going through psychologically? It's a moment, life around him is moving, but we're just isolated. And it's just the craziest thing the way he designed that shot.
Do you mind maybe for the listener describing what the double dolly shot is if they're unfamiliar?
So Spike has this, crazy rig of like, so he lays down some, dolly tracks, of course, and you usually have two people who are pushing or manning, Spike changed the game when he, decided to put the actual actor on the dolly, and then there's a dolly in front of that dolly. So you have two dollies that are, just on track. So it's like a little train that's just
Yeah.
moving, right? So what happens there is if you're just focused on the characters, specifically from like a medium close up, the world around is going to seem like it's just kind of passing by and the characters kind of floating and we don't know how that's happening. Really cool. It's really expressionistic. It's impossible to not feel something behind it. He's done it, basically in all of his films and to me, it's just like a really immersive move. And I thought it was just heartbreaking and just fantastic and genius to for that shot to happen at that moment in the film. We get to finally have this beautiful double dolly shot of him coming towards the camera, like we get to see Malcolm X.
That's a
Yeah,
great explanation though of the double dolly shot because it is a signature of Spike's. It does exist in almost all of his work, and is this really kind of beautiful use of something that seems really simple but is always effective. I got to get a
Yeah.
1 out of 10 from you. What do you give it? 1 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm gonna say 10, and then for this what the 3 hour
320, 322.
they shot this on film. I haven't had the privilege yet of shooting on film, the honor of it. I shoot, digital. But when you look at this film, the reason why I give it a 10 is it just almost eternalizes the film. Something about film makes it this portrait that'll just forever hang. It has a texture that I always will connect you back to the time period, everything. So, I give it a 10.
In 92, there is no just looking at a monitor and you see what you're going to get. These
Right.
filmmakers, Ernest Dickinson, has to break out the light meter, has to understand beforehand exactly
Yeah.
what he wants everything to do so they can calculate and dial it in. Sure, he's going to look through the viewfinder and he's going to be able to frame it up, but they're not going to know until the next morning
Yes.
if everything landed. So it is a different craft. The way this movie is made is not the way movies are made today, and that's not me dumping on movies today, but
Of course.
we do have to give credit where it's due. These are master filmmakers making something that is not just, oh, a couple beautiful images. There are hundreds of beautiful images stretched across 3.5 hours. But that being said, that brings us to use of sound. Spike Lee, definitely a guy that knows how to use music, knows how to use sound effects. Um, we talked a little bit earlier about one of the uses of music. I'm going to come back to that in a minute because I just want to ask you right out of the gate the use of gun shots in this movie and how they're associated very playfully with these sort of finger guns. But there is always this intensity and this sort of reminder of this is how this is going to end.
In a way, it was a little motif that he was storytelling through, and even in I believe what is it, the Foley itself of like even in the scene where he is assassinated for 19 making the film in 1992, it was so believable. I know exactly, what you're talking about, like, using the sound of a gun to like cut into a different scene, like coming from a different scene, right? Whether that was like his dad who was outside holding a rifle to hit like himself holding a rifle later on in the film with that iconic window shot of him holding the AK-47. The subcontext, Spike was definitely addressing, gun violence. There already had been in that last decade, political, assassinations that had happened. It really, packed an emotional punch, like you said. It kind of just lets you know the tone of like how this is going to end.
I'm just curious, what did you think of the soundtrack in Malcolm X? Because it is a soundtrack that time-wise lines up, just like a Goodfellas, there's music in there, but it also is celebrating something a lot deeper. You're not just hearing black voices, you're not just hearing black songs you've heard hundreds of times, but you're seeing them juxtaposed with images that gives a meaning that at least for a white lion thought, oh, I think this is what they've been saying about the whole time. You know,
Yeah. I thought it was great, first off, late 50s or, even early 50s, like early 60s. Even when Malcolm was little, the type of music he was listening to and what type of, artists, are being listened to. And like that was in combination with, white artists and black artists. It was a very diverse palette. It introduced me to, it introduced my ears to music that I had never heard before. At that point, Sam Cooke and, using that song in the film, that song's at that point, I mean, at least 30 years old,
oh, yeah.
and for it to still be so impactful, still so soulful. He uses music poetically. I feel like he does a great job at not just using it as like a regular sound cue to kind of help us carry out of this scene, but it's really a character. Like the
Yeah.
music aids in performances. It's a guiding hand.
1 out of 10, Tam. What are we giving use of sound?
What are we what are we giving news to sound? 10. We're gonna give it a 10.
Locked in. Don't feel bad, Tim. Look, a lot of people get nervous on this show when they hand out Tims. I don't think that's fair. Good movies deserve good reviews. it brings us to theme, and I think what's interesting when you're given a biopic, when you're given a real life story, is it's like you can't really reverse engineer a story from theme. Not every filmmaker does that, obviously, but I do think all good art is very aware of what it's trying to do because, in my opinion, good art is communicating. That's what it's doing. To me, this movie does an amazing job of navigating different themes that I feel like were completely obviously inspired by the real life of Malcolm X. Themes of tribalism, self-discovery, loyalty, and betrayal are probably the two kind of biggest themes, and also cultural trauma.
Definitely, I mean, definitely in alignment with the ones you just said. See, that's what I love about, film is that it really allows us to hear, how someone, takes a film and what, all those, ring loud to me. And then especially that, just the saying where you start isn't where you have to end. The biggest thing to me is just the metamorphosis of what it is to be a human being here on earth and choosing the new you over the old you. You get to see him shed a layer, almost like a butterfly. You see him go into this cocoon and he comes out and we're almost mourning, the Detroit Red and the Malcolm we got to know with the suits and, what seemed like this cool character was kind of living this life until it slowly started to just kind of unravel and get ahead of him. And I definitely saw that. Definitely, cultural trauma. I think the still itself when you and it's I think it's a top-down shot where you can see Malcolm, his body laying on the ground, and like you said, it was a very brutal death. And we talk about the power of imagery, bringing truth to power. It's something viscerally moving to see, bodies, black bodies hurting another black body, being in the black community, that's not something you can take in with, any type of desensitized perspective. It emotionally affects you, not just seeing a man that was killed, but seeing a man killed by somebody who would look like your uncle or your dad, and just wondering like, how do we get here? It's deep. It's something that could, I would say if there was a forum, it'd be a very deep conversation, behind it.
It doesn't really matter what you believe in if you have the courage to fight for that. If you have the courage to represent it, you will probably only be the only soul that truly understands what you're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
even the people who love you, like your wife, are probably going to ask you to dial back sometimes. You might die for your cause, which, as tragic as it is, as we look back at history, that death, I do think, catapults Malcolm X into, the a global culture. We see so many kids at the end saying, "I am Malcolm X, I am Malcolm X, I am Malcolm X." I don't know if that happens if he's still with us today. I do think that one of the reasons Malcolm is such an important character in history and is so well articulated in this movie is because he is able to acknowledge his flaws. He is able to change and grow, but still never lose any momentum of self.
And just one more on theme, right? And I think it's also a reflection on how much time we have here, on Earth, and when we, are focused on a mission. In his book, I'll say this: there's a lot of quotes by Malcolm I remember, but Malcolm stated that in all our deeds, the proper value and respect for time will determine success and failure. And I think that's just so powerful for a man. It seemed like the burden of knowing that you have, like we all know that ultimately we will finish our human experience, but as though sometimes people can just live as though life is infinite and just living in that. And every day you just imagine how present he would still would try to be while communicating the message, knowing at any point in time, I mean, it's just layers, man.
And he
Yeah.
literally dies communicating his message. I mean, he is on the pulpit when he's
Yeah.
slain, and that courage. And I mean, we see it in the movie. He doesn't even blink, smiles at the man who shoots him. And this is a real bold statement I'm about to make. So, Spike, let us know in the comments how off I am. But I truly think that Malcolm X, the film, is a statement that Malcolm X, the man, is the contemporary Christ. He is the black Jesus that he sort of talks about in the movie. I mean that from a a theoretical storytelling standpoint. I'm
Of
not
course,
implying
of
that
course.
the second coming of Christ happened. I mean,
Robert said,
maybe,
"Of course," because you know how the chat is. You know how
yeah, exactly. Maybe that is what I'm saying for engagement purposes. You go, guys, get ahead, get real angry in the comments and let me know. No, but I do think again we talk about Spike Lee is a very artistic storyteller, and I believe after watching this movie that is the statement Spike Lee was trying to make, and it's just that's just my take, that's my reaction. It would be very difficult for me to think of a contemporary leader other than Malcolm X who I could so closely point to and go, that's the story of Christ, like right there. Any case, I digress. 1 out of 10. What do you give the theme, Tim? Because then I get to give you the whole shebang. But if you give this a 10, I don't even have to reveal the score.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 10.
I
I'm
love it.
curious to see what it calculates to though.
Yes. Well, we gave the plot a 10, the characters
Okay.
and performances a 10. The
Okay.
visual storytelling also received a 10. You gave the
Okay.
use of sound a 10. And just a reminder, only seconds ago, you gave the theme a 10, which gives us 100% for Malcolm X. In terms of the plot, I gave it a 9.5, and the only reason I'm saying that is because this movie is based on source material, right? It's based
Right.
on book. But even as I say that, it's kind of not fair. But I'm gonna stick to my guns for now, only because I gave the characters and performances a 10. I gave the visual storytelling a 10. I gave
Yeah.
the use of sound a 10, and I gave the theme a 10.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I'm Spike again. You can be mad at me for the half point, but that's a 99 to your 100. I think that officially makes this the highest scored film in the series so far. It's only episode 4, but I have a feeling it's going to be really difficult for any film to top this. I really, really enjoyed this movie. Although it's close to 3.5 hours, I can't wait to check it out again. Tim, I'm so glad you were able to come today and hang out and talk about this classic. Maybe I could put you on the spot. What are a few of your other favorite Spike Lee joints?
Yeah, man. The Five Bloods, the Black Klansman.
Oh, yes, of course.
That's that's one to get into. That's a really good film.
Loved having you on the show. I'm so glad you could come to the studio. And it sounds like you're down to come back.
Absolutely loved it. I answered the call, man. I will always answer the call when it comes to community and filmmaking. Count me in, man. I'm looking forward to future conversations for sure.
If you are interested perhaps in pursuing an education yourself in the film world, which God only knows what that's going to look like in the next couple years, but hey, I'm keeping it positive. Uh, Tim is a professor at the genuinely world-renowned Full Sail University. Full Sail University is and has been for many, many years now a premier destination for anybody who's looking to study film and television. Don't want to turn this into too much of a commercial for Full Sail, but you will get to perhaps experience the great professor Timothy Richardson, who again I was so glad to have here today. So Tim, until next time, thank you for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Real Talk is powered by Real Digital. If you work for a brand or agency producing content, keep it real by setting up a consultation at www.realdigital.media to see how your next campaign can come in ahead of schedule and under budget.
The more I study the early works of Spike Lee, it breaks my heart to see so many incredibly relevant themes being expertly discussed and presented that modern audiences seem to think have never been explored. If Malcolm X the film was released today and you changed nothing about it, I truly believe it would be received as a masterpiece and resonate with audiences all over the world. But unfortunately, in 2025, the same team is releasing work that fails to have any relevance beyond an exercise in style. I was overwhelmed with goosebumps during the closing moments of the film, and when I heard the final voiceover say, "He didn't hesitate to die because he loved us so," like a religious epiphany, it hit me. The great Muslim leader, Prince Malcolm X, is the story of Christ, a man whose purpose was so powerful he rose from nothing and forever changed the world by proving if you are brave enough to live a life of freedom, you will absolutely be positioned as a threat against it. If you're going to dissect an epic, I believe you need a man of culture and integrity. So I'm very lucky to have with me the founder of Nefarious Media Network, Mr. Nate Milton. Brother Milton, welcome to the jungle. I'm so happy to have you here, and thank you for helping me score a big one.
No problem, Al. I'm glad that you invited me to this jungle. I hear they have fun and games here, but there's a lot to dissect when you look at Malcolm X, which is, in my opinion, Spike Lee's finest work. But before all that, I've heard a couple of your episodes. You're pretty good, man. But the question that needs to be asked that nobody else has asked, not even my dear friend of mine, but how are you talking, brother? Like, is nobody realizing that there is a lion with a podcast studio in the jungle, and we are speaking to him, and he is speaking back? I'm not saying anything negative about you, Al. I'm just saying we need to address the lion in the room.
You are a curious mind, and it does. I've checked the comments. Nobody's, and again, maybe it means we live in a more accepting world than I thought. By the powers that Real Digital has presented in the production world, anything is possible, including a lovable lion. That's right. Albert the lion can talk. And luckily I get to, because I get to dissect great films. So that's as much of the curtain as I can peel back. The good folks powering the show have used their magic to bring me, the mascot of Real Digital Media and Consulting Services, to life.
Yes, that's an answer I can accept. I can live with that truth. Truth is a theme of Malcolm X, so I appreciate you living in your truth, Al.
Well, Nate, before we start to dissect the movie, if you wouldn't mind maybe kind of priming us a little bit on, maybe when you saw the movie, kind of what your relationship was like when you saw it the first time, because I've got to imagine you did not see it for the first time screening it for the show.
No, I've seen this movie several times over the course of my life, and the first time I saw it was back in '92, and I just remember the hype surrounding this film, from everything from the marketing of the film to you couldn't walk down the street or watch a basketball game or watch a baseball game without seeing somebody with the X logo hat. But I'm going to go back a little bit further than that, Al, because the first time I really learned about who Malcolm X was would have been in the 7th grade. I think I can say I was a smart child, but I was not a very good student. And I would often end up in detention or study hall. And one of my attendants at study hall, much like Brother Baines in this film, sometimes you need somebody to, guide you along that path and point you in the right direction. She was like, you're pretty smart, but you're not doing great in class. You like to read because you're always in the library. Here, read this. And she handed me a copy of Alex Haley's The Autobiography of Malcolm X. Like, I was just so into it. Anytime I had free time after school, I'd be back into the book. That was kind of my first introduction to who Malcolm X was as a historical figure. When we flash forward to '92, when it's like, yeah, this movie's coming out, directed by Spike Lee and starring, by the way, Denzel Washington, who even at that time was already hailed as one of the great actors of our generation. And so I was hyped for it, and I was hoping that the film could kind of live up to my expectations.
I remember really feeling like, oh, Malcolm X is largely misrepresented. Obviously, you read the autobiography when you were a young man, but was that your sort of takeaway when reading the book, that, oh, wow, this guy that I've always heard as being like described as militant or sort of the violent, I don't know, side B to Martin Luther King's pacifist side A, which is just quite frankly not true. But I'm just curious, did you have a similar response when reading the book?
Slightly similar, just kind of growing up in a Black household. My dad is a former Navy chaplain and Baptist minister. My mom was a school teacher and is currently a Lutheran minister. And so, they were always like, hey, get your head in the books, read about your history, learn about your history. So I knew a little bit about Malcolm X. I knew he wasn't this caricature that a lot of the mainstream media kind of painted him as, but it's the same thing that happens to MLK after MLK dies. Like, he's reduced to, oh, that's the I Have a Dream speech. That's the everybody love everybody speech. It's like, no, Malcolm was more complex than that, just as MLK was more complex than this kind of neat little box that history tries to put him in. When I read the autobiography, it was just kind of like, yeah, like this gives more context, even more so than I did growing up in my home with my parents.
And I'll just say, like, I am a lion that grew up in a white household, so it is nice to hear that there is two different perspectives kind of coming to the same place, where you, having grown up in a household where Malcolm X was probably spoken about much differently, let's be completely honest, how it sounds like the autobiography, and by extension we'll find out in a second if the film validated that for you more, whereas from my perspective it opened my eyes. Let's fast forward to 1992. You see the movie. If we're just talking about plot, did the experience of watching the movie enhance what you read in the book? Did it give you something maybe you hadn't thought about or seen?
It absolutely did, Al. And I think there will be things that the written word cannot convey that moving pictures can. When I read in the book about the character of West Indian Archie, who was played by Delroy Lindo in the movie, I had this idea of who West Indian Archie is in my head. But then when we see him on the screen and how he is at once like just this cool, calculating figure, but also like that's a guy you don't want to mess with because there's some menace there. Or the way that Shorty, the character Spike Lee portrays, and Malcolm, just like when they're in their zoot suit days and wearing the conch hairstyles and they're dancing at the jazz club. These are things that a book can tell you, but when you see it happening on the screen in live action, it just kind of hits you differently. A lot of the plot of the movie I kind of knew going in just by reading the book. Just seeing it realized in live action just took all of those things that were in my head for those so many years. This is 100% what I was seeing in my head. I just didn't know how to formulate it.
Spike Lee is such a poetic storyteller. Like he is somebody who really uses the camera and color and music to extend beyond the realities that most, or I don't want to say most, but that other storytellers do. And it's interesting, because I agree with you that I think this is Spike Lee's strongest work. And it's interesting that that comes from, again, a biographical telling, of something that isn't at all based in fantasy. It's very much based in real life. And he brings this, again, poetic handling of the storytelling that I think really, really elevates it. And this very much feels like not an answer to, but just an equal to Goodfellas, in that it evolves in a certain way. It presents characters that only live in certain acts of the movie, but our main character evolves and learns and loves a life, but is betrayed by that life, and so on. Just in terms of the plot, because everything's so rich, and I know we're going to talk more about it. What would you give the plot 1 out of 10 for Malcolm X?
Whew. I mean, it's obviously the source material is already great, so you're building on a great foundation when you tell this story. And I think everything flows for the most part. Like you've got 3 distinct chapters of Malcolm X's life. You've got the beginnings where he's Malcolm Little and he's in Harlem and he's enjoying all the things that a young man in Harlem can enjoy. You've got Malcolm X once he gets out of prison and he joins the Nation of Islam. And then you've got, Malcolm X after he leaves the Nation of Islam. And I think for the most part, it's told in a concise way. The plot moves. It doesn't drag, which is kind of crazy, Al, for a movie that's over 3 hours long.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of clunkiness, and I still wrestle with this part of the movie because the ending, after they do the eulogy and we get to the Nelson Mandela part, I still kind of bump up against that. But everything else to me is just almost pitch perfect. I'll start with the 9. I'll give it a 9.
Locking in the 9. No, I love it. Look, we're not too far off in our scores there, and it's difficult, I think, for any storyteller when you're taking material that's real and you have to encompass a whole life. And I think Spike Lee does just as about a good a job as you can do, but it is also still an auteur's film. It's very much a Spike Lee movie. So I can see when you talk about like The Last Shot, for example, it's very much a choice. It's an artistic decision, and I can see how that might not land, all the time with everybody. Regardless, let's talk about characters and performances. I want to focus really quickly before we get to the obvious. You mentioned earlier Delroy Lindo, and he is sort of like the Robert De Niro character of when I talked about Goodfellas earlier. Like he's this sort of, but the arc is so extreme. And when we find him at the end and we see what Malcolm could have been, I just thought that was so powerful and profound. And for a guy who's so suave and cool and scary at the beginning to then be so authentically portraying this guy who's reduced to, he needs help to move his arms, his legs. It's just, wow, what a powerful performance. It would be really easy to overlook because there's so many great performances in this movie. So I just had to shout that out.
This movie is jam-packed. Like it's an all-star team of actors, particularly black actors from that time period. And I think that when you look at this story, it's Malcolm kind of searching for that father figure. His first father figure is West Indian Archie. Then it becomes Elijah Muhammad, and he falls out with both of those figures for different reasons. But as you said, Delroy Lindo, the portrayal of at the beginning of the movie when we first meet him, he's like this boss that power just exudes from him.
Mhm.
And then to see where he is at the end of his life, the realization when Malcolm looks at him, this figure that he both admired and feared has become, it's a very powerful scene. And Delroy Lindo is such an underrated actor.
Malcolm X is such a strong character. There's such a specific story to tell, but so much of his character is defined by the relationships he has with these various characters, whether it's West Indian Archie, whether it's Shorty, Angela Bassett's character who plays the love interest in the movie, because she has the unfortunate burden of having to react to his death.
Yeah, so I'll get to Denzel in a second, Al.
Okay,
but
yes,
first, because I could talk about Denzel's performance all day, but real quick, I want to give a shout out to Angela Bassett
Yes.
as Betty Shabazz, Malcolm X's widow, and just, well, wife and then widow. Just the power that she has on screen. And granted, she doesn't get as much time on screen as Denzel, as Malcolm X, but the scenes they share together, particularly like there's one towards the end of the movie where they're having an argument, and it's right before Malcolm realizes what the Nation of Islam and Elijah Muhammad are really doing, and how Elijah Muhammad has had all of these children with these young women that are part of the nation, and she's trying to get him to see the truth, and they have this big fight, and just the power between both of them. And like Angela Bassett has been great forever, and will continue to be great. But I think her and Denzel going toe to toe, that was a perfect match. And I also want to give a shout out to Spike Lee, because I'm always a bit leery, Al, when directors cast themselves in their own movies.
Yes.
But I feel like Spike knew just the right amount of Spike Lee to put in this Spike Lee joint. But I think he's really great as Malcolm's running buddy at the beginning of the movie. And then we see later when Malcolm joins the nation, Shorty meets up with him again and even attends one of Malcolm's services. I like the maturation of Malcolm in contrast with Shorty, who is still trying to hang on to that street life. Denzel Washington has had many great roles. Denzel Washington, as I said, has been one of the best actors of his generation since I was in high school, which for those doing math at home, it has been a while. When he steps into these shoes of Malcolm X as a historical figure, he just embodies the role. Like, I don't feel like I'm watching Denzel Washington. I feel like somebody got some footage and they colorized it, and I'm watching Malcolm X give his speeches, and the way that he plays not only the high flying moments, the high spots, to use wrestling terminology, when he's out doing these big speeches, you've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock landed on us. When he's going through all of the big moments of Malcolm X speeches, by any means necessary, but we also get the quiet moments.
That's right.
Where Malcolm goes to meet with the young women that have been hurt by Elijah Muhammad. They're like, we thought Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam would care for us and watch after these children. And he's like, Allah will look after us. Allah will look after us all. And the moment where Earl, his head of security, is angry because he feels like Malcolm's not taking enough precautions, and they're on the phone. And then Earl's just like, peace be unto you, brother Malcolm, as he's getting ready to hang up. And Denzel as Malcolm is like, no, that is peace be unto you, Earl. The famous Spike Lee double dolly shot that we get at the end of the movie, that's set to the sounds of Sam Cooke's A Change Gonna Come, when Malcolm is heading to his final speech before he is gunned down. The peace and resolve and calm that Denzel is able to convey just through his facial acting. I think it's easily one of the best performances in a biographical film that I've ever seen. And he deserved all of the awards. No shade to Al Pacino, but Denzel was robbed, Al. I don't want to speak ill of your namesake, but Denzel deserved that Oscar, not Al Pacino for Son of a Woman. I said it.
Hoo-wah! Tell him. There aren't too many famous Als that I can lean on, but you could not be more correct. And look, I can't imagine as a performer, as a director, both having to try to pull that out of a performer, but also trying how unbelievably satisfying it must have been when Spike's watching the dailies to just see Denzel knocking it out of the park time and time again. You mentioned it already. We could go on and on and on about characters and performances. So, Nate, I think I know what you're going to give it, but I got to get one out of you, a score, 1 out of 10. What do you give it?
Yeah, this one was easy. Absolutely. If Denzel were the only good actor in this entire film, right, it would still be a 10 because his performance was that great. But then when you add in Delroy Lindo, when you add in Spike Lee, when you add in Angela Bassett, when you add in like so many of the others, like the gentleman that played Elijah Muhammad, like I think he was excellent in his role. And it was a complex portrayal of Elijah Muhammad, who starts as this father figure for Malcolm X. And then we see the jealousy, and he feels like Malcolm's getting too big for his britches. Brother Baines, who comes to Malcolm in jail and is the one that kind of sets him on the right path. The scene where they're reading the dictionary together.
Oh, yeah.
Is still one of my favorites in this film. So like this film is loaded top to bottom, like even in small roles. There are so many great performances in this film, so it's easily a 10 for me.
I totally agree with you there. And we're talking about visual storytelling, and I'm glad you brought up that scene where they're looking at the dictionary, they're reading the dictionary, because so much of the power of Malcolm X as a man is his ability to weaponize language, his ability to sort of not only present and sort of represent this idea of how powerful a well-spoken individual can be, but the idea of even recognizing this isn't our language, but we can still master it and we can still use this to prevail.
I think it's excellent. I think it holds up. Spike Lee, you mentioned he's an auteur. He can be hit or miss when he kind of leans into his wants and desires for these Spike Lee joints. I happen to think he hits more often than he misses, but when he misses, I feel like he really misses. See Chirac, for an example. With Malcolm X, I think it just, much like with Denzel, with his performance, he knocked it out of the park every time. I feel like for the most part, Spike was firing on all cylinders. Actually, let's talk about the opening shot of the film, where it starts with the footage of the beating of Rodney King. And that just kind of puts you into the scene of, hey, this movie is not just talking about this historical figure, Malcolm X. It's talking about what we can learn from the life of Malcolm X and apply to today. When you see the American flag being burnt into the form of an X, when you go from a shot, when we see Malcolm on the street for the first time in Harlem, we start on this big, bright skyline with the picture of the Coca-Cola advertisement, and a train goes by, and then we go beneath the train tracks into the street, and it's a little less bright. It's a little less sunny. It's dark, and people are doing what they got to do to survive in this environment. The scene on the train where, Malcolm is doing his best to appease these white customers, and we get the little brief glimpse of what Malcolm really wants to do, and smash this ham and cheese sandwich in this patronizing, annoying officer's face. We get, as you said, the double dolly shot, which is probably the most famous shot from this film. But one of the quiet shots in this movie that I really love is when Malcolm is doing one of his first big speeches for the Nation of Islam, and he's standing in front of this giant picture, this giant mural of Elijah Muhammad. And so, like, there's the wide shot where you see Elijah Muhammad just kind of looming over everything. But then when we go to the close-up shot, Al, you see Malcolm at the podium, and then you just see the two eyes of Elijah Muhammad
right between them.
Yes. And it just kind of like that foreshadowing that, yes, Elijah Muhammad is glad that you're bringing new life into this Nation of Islam, but he's also watching you because he doesn't want your star to ascend past his star. And there's so many great little moments, I think, both visually, but then with the soundtrack, again, A Change Gonna Come is a brilliant choice for a song for that final walk to the ballroom where Malcolm gives his final speech. Shotgun is used by Junior Walker and the All-Stars, used to great effect. I'm thinking back to the prison scenes where Denzel is finally making that conversion to Islam. Oh, I almost forgot. Like, one of the things that Spike had to fight for was shooting on location.
Oh, sure, of course.
And when we get that pilgrimage to Mecca at the end of the film, I think that is some of the most beautiful cinematography that I've seen Spike Lee do, where we just get these shots of Malcolm X kind of stepping into his fully realized final form, if you will, and just the way Spike gets these great shots in Mecca. So I think he did a great job with this, probably his best work from a visual standpoint as a director.
Great cinema brings something new to the conversation, but also echoes in many ways everything that came before it. And there's just all these moments where I'm watching this brilliant filmmaker do things that seems like, and maybe it's not, I might be interpreting it incorrectly, but where he is sort of playing with the history of cinema. You talk about the American flag at the beginning. I'm immediately thinking of the movie Patton. There's a film the Lower Depths, which has been made many times. Truffaut made a version, Kurosawa made a version, and you talk about that descending from the skyline down beneath the tracks. This is a visual trope that's used in both movies to sort of start in this beautiful sort of higher structure and then comes down. And those are movies about class, and so we see that here. As I continue forward, I made this connection. I'm curious if you did. When I saw the footage at the beginning, it reminded me of Ryan Coogler's Fruitvale Station, and you know that movie very similarly does the same thing, which starts with footage. Obviously, very different movies in terms of how the footage impacts the story, but I dare anybody to watch Fruitvale Station and not feel 100 emotions within the first 60 seconds because of the footage you watch. And I would like to think maybe that's a nod, or Coogler growing up in a world where he was watching films like Malcolm X. So I just want to kind of connect what I saw, and like I said, a lot of waves and echoes of cinema history, but also link that will forever be a part of cinema. I think Malcolm X is, and a strong, important link.
I would, again, another strong score for Spike Lee here. And again, I think to your point, Coogler obviously is probably influenced by Spike, as he was for a long time. Really, not that there weren't other Black directors before him or that were his contemporaries. I'm thinking primarily of somebody like a Melvin Van Peebles, who had a big effect on Black cinema, but was kind of lost to history for a while. But Spike was kind of our only guy that we had in the arena. And so, yeah, it wouldn't shock me if that was a direct influence on him. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 9 out of 10.
Visual storytelling, we're locking in a 9 out of 10. That brings us to use of sound. You mentioned Sam Cooke earlier. The context of that song being played, unfortunately, as he is walking to sort of his final, I want to say speech, but he doesn't even really get to give the speech.
Obviously, you have to start with that "A Change Gonna Come" scene, where we get not just Malcolm going forward to that final moment, but you see Betty and the girls, that are getting ready to go to this ballroom. You see the group of assassins that are getting ready to go as well. And it's kind of paralleling these three tracks where Malcolm, Betty, Shabazz, and the kids, and then the assassins are all headed to the same point for this final meetup. And we get just some really poignant moments, is I think the word that I would use, Al, where we were in the ballroom and one of Malcolm's daughters drops her doll on the floor. Giancarlo Esposito.
That's right.
Just picks up the doll and just like, hey, I think you dropped this, my beautiful sister. And just Betty, like, what do you say to the nice man? And she's like, thank you. Oh, it's my pleasure, my beautiful queen. And then as soon as Betty and the kids walk away, you just see that fake smile drop from Esposito's face. And it's just like the foreshadowing. And then when we get after the double dolly shot, Malcolm is stopped on the street by a woman who recognizes him, an older Black lady. And she's just like, I don't care what those people say about you. You're going to be all right. Don't worry. Jesus will protect you. And again, we see the smile that Malcolm has, like, okay, yeah, everything's going to be all right. I believe you. And then she says, Jesus will protect you. And then we get kind of this far off look, like Malcolm's just like, okay.
It is one of maybe the darkest jokes. I don't even know if it's comfortable to call it. It got a laugh out of me when I was watching it, but it is so smart and well done. Yeah, but subtle, very subtle. Yeah.
Going back to the beginning of the film, where we see Shorty and Malcolm going out for a night on the town, where they're both in these bright zoot suits and they're both doing the crazy walk, the kind of the music of the time period that just fit when they're at the club and they're dancing. The scene after Malcolm's been working on the train and they listen to the Joe Louis fight. Joe Louis wins the fight, and so he takes the first stop and gets off in Harlem, and just the party that is going on in Harlem to welcome Joe Louis back to New York. Spike Lee is always somebody who is cognizant of what music can do to enhance a film. I feel like Spike knows what he's doing. He doesn't overdo it, though, because I feel like there would be a temptation to overdo it, particularly with the music of the time period, which I know Spike is a fan of. There is restraint shown in this film that we usually don't get.
Coming off a 9 for visual storytelling. Use of sound.
This is Spike Lee. I know, like, Jordan is one of his favorite athletes, and this is Jordan's flu game for Spike Lee when it comes to directing. It's the It's the most indelible and the most iconic thing that he has ever done, in my opinion. The final song we hear in the film is Someday We'll All Be Free. And I like that song, but I don't know, like I get why that song is in the film, but I don't know if that's the mood I should be feeling after this film. And again, maybe that has more to do with me, Al, than what Spike was trying to say. Because I feel like after watching this, I feel angry.
Yeah.
At history. I feel angry at history, Al.
Yeah.
I want to fight history. And so like I feel like maybe something more militant would have been appropriate for me personally.
Sure.
But I get why, coming off of the eulogy by Ossie Davis and the scene with Nelson Mandela, that we kind of want to end on this hopeful, positive note. But that's the only thing that I kind of bump up against from time to time with this film. So again, this is another strong grade for me. It's a 9 out of 10.
Locking in the 9. When they cut to Nelson Mandela, what I think happens, and it happens earlier in the movie with Reverend Al Sharpton, you see that there is a community, a powerful community making this movie, and even just in a moment and at the end, it does feel like something way bigger than just a film. And I think that's really special and really difficult for any movie to capture. But let's get into theme a little bit, because not only wraps us up here, but that does encapsulate a lot of kind of what we're already talking about when we're talking about the end of the movie. And, for those unfamiliar, we end in a classroom and there's all these young children looking right into camera, which again is a very Spike Lee move. And they're all saying, "I am Malcolm X." And I'm even getting goosebumps as I talk about it, because it is, look, it's on the nose. I mean, let's face it, I wouldn't go so far as to call it clever, but it is extremely powerful. And there's so much finesse and nuance throughout the previous 3 hours and 20 minutes. When you get to that last 2, I don't care. I think you can be on the nose. And because the themes at that point are just sort of bubbling at the seams.
Yeah, real quick, I'll piggyback off of what you said, or lion back, as it were, Al.
Thank you.
I don't want to diminish your community, but I feel like that's probably why I bumped up against it. I think the first time I saw the film, I'm looking at this from the perspective of somebody that kind of knows the deal. For a lot of people, though, this is kind of their first introduction to Malcolm X, or their first real deep dive. I think the first time I saw it, I was just kind of like, that feels forced. It feels corny, Spike. But then when I've watched it, I think there are times where I've absolutely loved it. It depends on when you watch the film. But I do love, again, the eulogy from Ossie Davis leading into the 2 classrooms, the one in America in Harlem, and then the one in South Africa with Nelson Mandela, who had not yet become the president of South Africa.
Right.
And he's speaking to these kids, and he's, in the words of Brother Malcolm. And then I do like that Spike gives Malcolm X the last word in the Malcolm X movie, where we cut from right before Nelson says, "by any means necessary," to archival footage of Malcolm X. And he's like, "by any means necessary." And then we go to the credits. The theme of this film, I think I can sum that up more succinctly than I did my feelings about the last 2 minutes of Malcolm X. The theme of this film, to me, Al, is growth. It's growth. And we see that with Malcolm X. Again, 3 very distinct portions of this man's life. Like most people, when they get something new in their life, whether it's a new religion or a new girlfriend or a new job or a new hobby, he goes 110% into that. He is the most Islam in the building. He is the most Nation of Islam person you will ever see. This has nothing to do, well, it does have something to do with the movie, because it's a thought I have every time I see the Mecca scene, but it has more to do with history. And I think that's why the ending kind of always has this discordant feeling for me, Al, because it's like we lost Martin Luther King and Malcolm X within short order. Malcolm X is kind of coming more towards the point of, we don't need Black separation. We don't need Black isolation. We can all work together, but there are some things you got to fix, America, in order for that to be achieved. And then we've got Martin Luther King at the same time, who is like, obviously, he's nonviolent. He's the peaceful guy. He's the guy that America is able to tolerate. And he's palatable. But Martin at this time is also like, you know what? Sometimes you got to give somebody the carrot and the stick. Sometimes you can only turn the other cheek for so long.
Right.
And so we see Martin start to become a little bit more militant, quote unquote.
Sure.
And it's like, man, the trajectory of these two men's lives, that they were getting ready to kind of converge and arrive at the same ideal. If both men had lived, in the history of this country, particularly when it comes to race relations, is dramatically changed, is dramatically altered. And so I think that's what gets me angry, Al. It's just like, and again, this has nothing to do with you, Spike Lee. This has nothing to do with the movie, but it's like that. I think there are certain points in history where things could fundamentally change if one outcome happens versus another. And I feel like if Malcolm X and Martin Luther King survive into the 70s, America looks a lot different today than it currently does.
I totally agree with you, and I selfishly I'm hoping Spike Lee is listening. And Spike, what I want you to do is I want you to take a play out of Tarantino's playbook and just do a revisionist history movie. And I want to see Spike Lee doing Malcolm X and MLK. They both live, and I want to see what that looks like.
Yes. And here's the thing. I've given this movie a 10. I've given this movie a couple 9s. So, people can do math out there, but it doesn't matter. Sometimes you have to override math with feelings and with heart and the truth of your emotions, Al. And the truth of the matter is, whenever I watch this film, even if there are some things that I personally think could have been done better or could have been eliminated from this film, this film is a 10 for me all day. Like, it's 3 hours long, but doesn't feel like it's 3 hours. It never really drags. For anybody in the audience that has not seen Malcolm X, you owe it to yourself. If you are interested in history, if you were interested in Denzel Washington, if you're just interested in the art of making a film, Warner Brothers gave Spike Lee an ultimatum. Like, this can't be 3 hours. And they're like, what do you think this is? Endgame, even though Endgame won't happen for another 15, 20 years. Right. What do you think this is? And Spike is like, no, this has to be the length that it is. So the funding was pulled. Members of his crew were fired, and he had to go hat in hand to people like Prince and Michael Jackson and Oprah and Bill Cosby, and we'll leave that there, and Magic Johnson to get funding for this thing, and Janet Jackson. Yes, this is bigger than just this story, even though the story's pretty big. This is about the Black community over the years, and it was true on and off screen, because Spike wouldn't have been able to get this done if folks hadn't have reached out with no promise of anything coming back to them. Like, no promise of, hey, I got points on the back end, or hey, you'll get a cut of the merch. It's just like, hey, I need to make this movie about Malcolm X starring Denzel. Can you help me? And they did, and we had a wonderful film because of it. So you get probably the most in-depth look at this figure that is loved by some, hated by others, and misunderstood by most in Malcolm X. And so, yeah, this is a 10 all day for me.
We've got all the scores locked in now, Nate, so I can do the big reveal. You gave the plot a 9, the characters and performances a 10, the visual storytelling a 9, the use of sound a 9, and the theme a 10. So that's a 94 out of 100. I'm safe to say that's an A+. I mean, I don't think I would hope Spike isn't offended by that if he's listening. I gave just a little off from you. The plot, I gave a 9.5 to your 9. I did give the characters and performances a 10 because I don't think anyone couldn't. I don't know how you could not give this movie a 10. Visual storytelling, I did give a 10 to your 9. It did just enough for me. I felt like use of sound, I also did give a 10, just sort of the same thing. When we talk about the canon of Spike Lee, I think this is a really great example of how an auteur can adapt to a very real life biographical story. And then for theme, you and I, again, we landed in the same place. I gave it a 10. So it was a 99 for me, to your 94, both A pluses, pretty solid average there that, again, I would hope Mr. Lee could be happy with.
Absolutely, Al. I was now I can pull back the curtain because, I was asked to come on this podcast and talk to a lion, and I didn't know how this was going to work, Al. I'll try anything once when it comes to podcasting, but I was like, does a lion even know how to operate the microphones? Does a lion even know? Do lions have opposable thumbs? Is this going to work from a technical standpoint? These are all questions that were swirling in my mind, Al, before we started talking this evening. Yes, obviously, to answer your question, Al, we can do this again sometime.
Well, I love it. I thank you for making the journey. I know it is a little bit of a trek. And for anybody who hasn't checked out Malcolm X, like Nate so eloquently put it, you should. But if you have not checked out the Nefarious Media Network, you should also check that out because they've got tons of great stuff going on. They are on the Instagram, they're on social media, they're also on Patreon, they're here on YouTube as well. Everything is linked in the description, so make sure that you go and you check them out. Give them a follow. You can hear a lot more of Nate.
Thank you so much, Al. I appreciate it, man. Everybody supporting the Nefarious Media Network because we're changing the game by any means necessary. And listen to Al because you know what? He may be a lion, but when it comes to his thoughts about movies, y'all, he's not lying.
Platinum Plastic isn't just a proud sponsor of Real Talk, they're also the home for all our new designs and merchandise. Follow Platinum Plastic on Redbubble to see all our A+ gear. That's Platinum Plastic on Redbubble for all your Real Talk merch.